Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good Friday afternoon. I want to welcome you all to the MTS Public Security Committee meeting. It is 1:31, and I will now call the meeting to order. And at this time, we will have committee members who are present to, on the screen, it should be something that allows you to indicate that you are here. Is that up already? Where is it? Oh, okay, there you go. I'm voting. Oh. Okay, do we have a quorum?
Chair, we have a quorum with 5 members present and 1 member absent.
Thank you so much. Okay, we will go to non-agenda public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public that requested to make a comment?
Yes, Chair, we do have 1 public comment. Alex Wong, if you could please unmute yourself.
To maximize passenger security, it is crucial to increase trolley frequency. Increased trolley frequency helps passengers feel safer, in addition to shortening travel times and alleviating overcrowding. Consider how in 2023, 89% of total crimes happened on the trolley. Moreover, 84% of trolley Part 1 crimes and 60% of trolley Part 2 crimes happened at stations rather than on board trolleys. That's why I applaud MTS's decision to increase late-night trolley frequencies to 15 minutes system-wide. MTS should also increase mid-coast frequencies in June 2025. I am concerned that MTS may delay 7.5-minute frequencies on the mid-coast in order to balance deficits. Increasing mid-coast frequencies to 7.5 minutes is an excellent investment. It only costs $3.7 million annually to do so, and the Blue Line has lower per-passenger subsidies than nearly every MTS bus route. And with Blue Line ridership growing by 11.4% in the past fiscal year alone, 7.5 minutes mid-coast frequencies cannot come sooner.
Chair, that concludes our public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. At this time, we will move to item number 3, which is the approval of the minutes from our June 7th Public Security Committee meetings. Do we have any comments on this item?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. And at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes if there are no corrections. Okay. Okay, so Committee Hall has made the motion. Committee Member Dillard has seconded. Please vote. Just, yeah, wait, Nana, one moment. Is it?
Chair, we're having technical issues.
Okay, we'll do a voice vote if you call the roll.
Montgomery Stepp,
Yes.
Dillard, Donovan, absent. Gonzalez, Rodriguez, Hall.
Yes.
And I think I turned on 2 of your mics. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you so much. So we'll figure out those technical difficulties while we go to item number 4. This is Transit Agency Fare Enforcement Model Review. So Karen Landers and Dan Brislin will be presenting for us, and you can proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So Karen Landers, MTS General Counsel. With me is Dan Brislin, our Deputy Director of Security. And what I'm going to do for you today is go through a review of the different fair enforcement models that transit agencies in California use, and then some potential issues for the committee to discuss. So in general, there are 3 fair enforcement model types. There's the criminal model, there's a purely administrative model, and then there's what I've been calling a hybrid. So I'm going to walk you through the details of each of those. So by default in California, public transit agencies' fair enforcement penalty is a criminal penalty. It's set forth in statute in Penal Code Section 640. At MTS, we actually have within our enabling legislation, when we were created in 1975, there is another separate code section that also establishes a criminal penalty for fare evasion. So under the general provisions, Penal Code 640, a first or a second violation for fare evasion is considered an infraction with fine of up to $250 and up to 48 hours of community service, which needs to be completed within 30 days. For third and subsequent violations, it's considered a misdemeanor, and the fine goes up to $400 or the potential for 90 days in jail. Under MTS's enabling legislation, it actually says that the first violation is an infraction with a fine of up to $75, and that the second and subsequent violations are misdemeanors with a fine of up to $500 or 6 months in jail. In practice, it's my understanding that the court generally uses the $75 fine that is in our enabling legislation and not the penal code code section, but there are always additional court fines or fees that get added on. So under the criminal process, you are cited for fare evasion, the citation gets sent to court. Here, it's kind of like the traffic court side for adjudication and determination of what the punishment could be. So a fine or community service or a combination of the two. The statutes under California also do allow the option of an agency to then, instead of using the Penal Code 640, that they can use an administrative penalty process that's set out by statute in the Public Utilities Code. And so that essentially says that agency can instead impose and enforce an administrative penalty for fare evasion. And it essentially just transfers the responsibility for managing the adjudication and the penalty process from the Superior Court to the transit agency. And it then sets some minimum rules of how the agency has to adjudicate those penalties and enforce the citations. It does have a basic premise that the citations issued by the agency is prima facie evidence of the fare evasion. So ultimately, you don't have to provide any other additional evidence that fare evasion took place. It is considered a rebuttable presumption, which means that somebody could bring in evidence to say that they think that that didn't occur. The maximum penalty under this administrative penalty process is $125 for first and second violations, and then $200 per violation for third and subsequent. It does require the agency to offer either an installment plan for paying that penalty or a deferred payment plan if the person provides adequate proof of an inability to pay. So that's not on every citation, but they want you to have a process in that case. It also gives you the option of allowing community service, and it requires you to offer that for any minors who are cited for fare evasion. 21 days after you get your citation, you can, within 21 days, you can request an initial review, which is basically like a immediate appeal to the agency. And the citation would need to be dismissed if the agency's review of that found that no fare violation actually occurred or other interest of justice merited cancellation of that citation. If that citation is not canceled after that initial review, then the individual may request an administrative hearing. They have to do that within 21 days of receiving that initial review decision. Then the process that has to be followed is that the agency must hold an administrative hearing within 90 days. That hearing has to be at the option of the person requesting it, either by mail or in person. They do require that in order to request a hearing, the person has to deposit the fine in advance. But then also have a little bit of an inability to pay waiver. But if you want a hearing to further contest your penalty, you have to make a deposit and pay in advance that $75 to $125 fine. Then it requires the agency to establish procedures that there would be independent, objective, fair, and impartial review of the contested citations. The hearing officer also has to have appropriate qualifications, training, and objectivity. They specifically say, which is completely reasonable rule, that their compensation cannot be linked to the number of fines or penalties that they assess or collect. The agency is not required to be present to present evidence or testimony at the hearing because, again, that citation is evidence that the fair violation occurred. I still haven't quite been able to figure out then what is the hearing officer considering. If the citation is there as prima facie evidence of the fair evasion, then what is the hearing officer actually adjudicating? That would be something we'd need to kind of find out, like in practice, what is the subject of most of the fines. And then within 30 days of getting the decision at the administrative hearing, the individual can request a superior court review of the hearing officer's decision. And this kind of follows the process of a small claims court appeal. Right now people can take certain matters to small claims court, and if they don't agree with the commissioner's decision, it goes to the limited civil department at the superior court for an appeal. And so that is provided for under this process. The last type of fair enforcement model is a hybrid fair enforcement model. And that's essentially a combination of criminal and administrative enforcement. Looking at the agencies, which I'll go through individually in a minute, it basically seems that other agencies besides MTS that have a hybrid, it really depends on, they have both administrative officers and they have law enforcement officers. And it depends on who the person is that came into contact with the fair evader of the type of citation that gets issued, was basically the explanation we got from most of the agencies. There is one where your first and second violation is administrative, and then third and subsequent is criminal. MTS, and I'll walk through our program in a minute, the diversion program is basically the administrative option before then you can contest it and request a hearing in court. But our program is unique. That we didn't find another agency in California that structures it the way ours is. So just to remind you what our enforcement model is, so our citations are criminal, but there's an administrative option to review or resolve it before you go to the criminal hearing. So we offer that within 15 days of the citation, you can appeal. Generally, again, it's really seems like it follows that the administrative hearing process's initial review, because people will submit it to say, I don't actually think that I was in violation or other interests of justice of the circumstances that you should dismiss it. And our staff will review that, we'll pull video, we'll look at reports, we'll pull their Pronto account information and decide. And some of the more common times when we do, grant that appeal is the ticket vending machine wasn't working. And we will verify with our staff and our video that it wasn't working and that the person actually tried to go by and couldn't. Or they may have a monthly pass product that's loaded on their, that they have it in their Pronto account, but for whatever reason, their Pronto account wasn't working or, wasn't able to be read. And in that situation, they actually have technically already paid for their fare. And so we feel in the interest of justice that we should dismiss the citation in that case, because really the point of the program is just to people to buy their fare. So if we don't grant an appeal, then they have 120 days from the date of the citation to resolve it by paying a reduced fine, which right now is set at $25, or completing 3 hours of community service. If they don't participate in diversion, then after that 120 days passes, the citation is entered into the court system for hearing and adjudication, which means that if they do participate, it never even gets entered into like a court database or anything. It just basically gets thrown away. We also do work with participants on individualized plans where appropriate. So if somebody has multiple citations that they want to resolve, but stacking 6 fines together or community service seems excessive, then we have worked with them to kind of meet them in the middle and reduce the fine or the community service hours. And then for individuals that didn't take advantage of diversion, and their citations went through the court system, but they're ready or want to resolve them, then we do have a partnership with the Public Defender's Office and the Homeless Court Program to offer post-conviction relief in those situations. So we went back to look at what similar California transit agencies, what their programs are like. This review really focuses on agencies that have rail, because for us and most agencies, the fare enforcement on a bus is entirely different. You have to walk by the gatekeeper of the operator and pay before you get on bus. And so our fare evasion on bus has been consistently around 3%. And so that's not an area where people are getting cited for fare evasion. It's really the rail system, where at MTS, we are what's called a barrier-free system. There is no gates that you have to walk through or station you have to enter. And so it's really, you can get on the train. We don't have an operator who's, checking your ticket as you go through. And so we looked at other rail agencies that some of them do have a barrier, some of them don't, but we felt like that was the best comparison for looking at their fare enforcement models. And what we found is that 3 of those comparable agencies have a criminal enforcement model. That's North County Transit District, SAC-RT, and MetroLink. 2 have a purely administrative model, including LA Metro and San Francisco Muni. And then 3 other agencies had a hybrid, which would be BART, Santa Clara VTA, and Caltrain. So just a few more details about the criminal enforcement agencies. The NCTD, SAC-RT, and MetroLink are all non-barrier systems. They have criminal citation programs, and they do not offer any sort of administrative resolution option. So the citations are just sent to court and result in a monetary fine. And then during that court process, the court commissioners can consider financial hardship or payment plans or community services options. And then historically, then if they don't pay those fines, then the court refers them to a collection agency. Has been our experience. I know that happens in San Diego. I think that happens in superior courts throughout the state. So the administrative enforcement agencies, LA Metro, they're part barrier system. They have certain stations where you have to go through a gate to enter them, but then they have other ones that you do not. If you're found without a fare, it is subject to an administrative citation. They have been adjusting the program since they introduced it about 5 or so years ago. So right now they're looking at the third or subsequent fare violations could be subject to an exclusion order. Though they're still working out how do you actually enforce that. Their fine under their administrative program is $75 and 5 hours of community service. They do offer an online transit school that you can go to once each year that would reduce your fine by $25. So you would pay $50 instead of $75 if you watch a video about why fares are important to transit agencies and why you should pay your fare. And then they follow the administrative hearing process that's set out in the statute that I talked about, where you can request an appeal or a hearing within 21 days. They do apply late fees if you don't pay your fine. And so ultimately that can take your fine up to $125. And again, as I mentioned, they are experimenting with some exclusion orders, but when we talked to them, it was very new. And so they didn't necessarily have much experience of has that been effective? And they are also working to harden more of their stations right now people will jump gates. And so they're putting fencing up to the ceiling to try to prevent that. And they're increasing their officer staffing. So they're having officers waiting at the gates, to enforce it. So those have been some of the efforts that they have been doing. They did tell us that less than 15% of their administrative citations actually get resolved, and that they have had some issues with people providing invalid addresses. So, but these have been kind of anecdotal conversations where we've called and had interviews with their programs to tell us what you do, how do you do, what has your experience been? We haven't found any agency that's actually written a report documenting statistics from their programs. For Muni, it is a non-barrier system for streetcars and cable cars. They also do the administrative citation process. Their, published information is that it's $130 citation. We were a little confused because I think the max is supposed to be $125. So I'm going to leave that maybe that was a typo on one of their documentation. But it is up to the, I think at least the 125 limit. They do offer you a $20 credit for every hour of community service if you want to kind of buy down your fine. And then they have, they follow the appeal and hearing officer process under the code section, but they do assess various late fees and collection fees if you don't pay. And then they refer unpaid fines and exclusions to a collection agency. They also are trying to find ways where they can harden their system and where they do have some stations with barriers and adding officers for additional enforcement. So then the hybrid agencies, they're essentially, so at BART, that is a barrier system. So there are fare gates that people have to go through. The first 2 citations are administrative, but 3rd or more, or if you commit fare evasion in front of one of their law enforcement officers, then you get a criminal citation. So it's kind of depends on who you commit the violation in front of, depends on if it's administrative or criminal, and then they do assess if it's your 3rd violation or more, then that shifts it to criminal. For their administrative program, it's $75 or 5 hours of community service, and they follow they also do the online traffic transit school that BART does, and they follow the code sections process for appeal hearings, and they do add up to $50 of late fees that could take the fine up to 75 or 125. If you don't resolve the site, then that penalty gets referred to a collection agency. If it's criminal, then it just follows that criminal process. VTA in San Jose, it really depends on which officer cites you, was generally the information that we got from them. They didn't respond to our request for information to explain how they do their administrative citation hearing. I'm assuming they just follow the code section that says, pretty much how you have to lay that out, but I don't have the specific confirmation from VTA. And then Caltrain is also that it's subject to administrative citation for your first 2 violations, but for 3rd or more would be either a criminal citation or they would issue an exclusion order for up to 90 days. Though it does sound like right now they're not quite implementing their 3rd or more process, which would be, you have to make sure that your officers know what number of violation is when they're contacting with the person. So that's a problem. And their citation is the $75. We do know they offer community service, but they hadn't confirmed for us like how many hours that they require to avoid the $75 fine. And then they do, if the citations aren't paid, they refer those to a collections agency. So one of the things that we were looking at and anticipating if this committee or the board asked us to further explore if MTS wanted to basically remove the diversion program and replace it with a fully administrative process is what would we need to do to better inform the board and implement that direction. And so there's 3 things that we've identified that we think we would need to take more action on. So I'll walk through those with you. It really is establishing what's the scope and the rules of our program, what are the resources needed and the cost to implement that. And then there's one other kind of operational issue that I think that we would need to do more research on. So the first one, to establish the proposed scope of an administrative penalty program, the board and committee would need to decide, what's the fine amount that we're going to impose under that program? What would the community service hours that we would want to impose in lieu of paying the fine amount? Should we institute a different penalty amount for subsequent violations so that 1st and 2nd violation is a lower fine, 3rd and more is higher? Should we impose, and if so, how much, late fees or collection fees for untimely or unpaid penalties? And then what would the consequences be of an unresolved administrative citation? Do we send it to collections? Do we issue an exclusion order? If we do that, what's our process going to be to actually enforce those? So those are all questions of, depending on the direction that the board wanted to go, we would need to then answer those questions. The next then is, based on that scope, what are the resources that we need before we could implement it, and what would the costs and budget be needed? So just thinking through what the features of these other programs have, there's staffing and third-party contract needs, for collecting the fines, reviewing the community service completion, scheduling appeal hearings, hiring the designated hearing officers, mailing the correspondence to confirm citation and various communications that we need to give, applying the late fees, notice that it's been referred to collections, developing various administrative program reports and data for the board and the legislature. Within that also, there would be capital needs, like you have to offer an in-person hearing. So where is the location that we would provide for these, hearings to happen? How often does it need to be available? Is it a 5-day a week, 7-day a week thing? Is it once a week that you have it staffed? Those are things that we'd have to figure out. We also probably would need a new citation software and hardware with the database tools, just so that if the board, especially if the board wanted to do graduated penalties, we would need a software that would be able to tell them real time in the field if the person that they're citing had previously been cited for fare evasions, because when you write up the citation, you need to tell them, what the violation is. And so if you have a different penalty for a third or subsequent violation, our officer would need to know that at the time they're citing them. And then, we're not set up to be, kind of a bill collector and those sorts of things. Our finance department would be a little overwhelmed by that. And so all of the agencies we talked to had an outside collections vendor. Some of them had vendors that handled the whole hearing process themselves, and then some, individually figured out how they're going to hire and who they're going to hire as hearing officers, and had in-house staff do some of the data collection and contractors do others. So we would have to look at kind of what's the best way for MTS to fulfill all those needs. And then the last issue, and I start this off to say I am not a criminal procedure expert, but this is an issue that has been brought up to us. And so far, the informal kind of questions we've asked to other people have said that they think that it is, absolutely something that we need to look at more closely, which is, if we switch to a purely administrative program, so that means that fare evasion at MTS is no longer under like a criminal penalty, then would MTS and our law enforcement partners still have probable cause? And I've been corrected that I should call this reasonable suspicion. It's kind of under the umbrella of probable cause, but do we have reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed to detain a fare evader and then write them the citation? And because if we don't have that reasonable suspicion to detain, that normally comes from the criminal nature of the violation. So if it's only under an administrative program, then do we have the right to do that? Because if we don't have the ability to detain, then there's no obligation for the fare evader to cooperate with our administrative citation process. And there's restrictions on what our officers can do in trying to get them to stay in order to write a citation. And so what I have been told is that it would basically, if there's not the criminal violation, then we don't have the right to detain. And so our process of asking the person for a fare, telling them they need to wait so I can write a citation, that would all be considered an unlawful detention. And so ultimately, if we did that, and that is what the law is, we need to understand the scope of what we're allowed to do. We need to train our officers. It's an area that I think is of big enough concern that it has been implied that we would need to train our officers to tell a person, since they look like an officer and somebody would assume during the contact that they are being detained, that we would probably have to affirmatively have a script to tell them they're not being detained. So it's a complicated issue that we definitely would, I think, need to commission an outside legal opinion to tell us what the parameters of what we can and can't do. We did have a conversation, like in the course of discussing with the San Diego PD chief of police and his assistant chief of police, we were talking about potentially restarting our joint task force. And they indicated that if we change to administrative program, because that would take away the criminal underpinning of how we do our joint patrols, that they didn't feel like they would be able to participate in either our current special enforcement details or in a future joint task force because of the risk of unlawful detention, liability, and those issues. We did talk to LA Metro and San Francisco Muni and asked them if this was a consideration. Didn't sound like anyone has fully done a full legal analysis, but they all seem to agree that yes, that this is an issue. And that people are allowed to say, you know, even I don't want to participate in the fair check process. And then we had a meeting earlier this week with the district attorney's office and the city attorney's office, and I asked them this question. And while they generally said that's really for law enforcement to decide when they're allowed to detain, they did again say generally that they agree that in an administrative situation that there would not be the reasonable suspicion to detain. And so that somebody would be able to tell our officers, if even at the beginning of a fare check, you know, if I'd like to see your fare, that they likely would be allowed to say that they decline to show their fare and that we won't have any recourse to enforce that. So again, I am not a criminal procedure expert, but I would want to make sure that if we change our program, that we structure it in a way that is lawful. And so I would want a outside legal opinion to tell us what we can and can't do and make recommendations on how we should train our officers in those issues. So with that, we brought this to the Public Security Committee just to give them a report of what other agencies are doing to provide us with any additional direction on research or things you want us to do on this issue, or it's, you know, at your purview to forward a recommendation to the board about a potential change to enforcement models.
And if I could add, the next item on the agenda is about the diversion program that we brought to the board at the last meeting.
Yeah, so they're not necessarily companion, but they kind of weave together.
Yeah,
So
what you do here may impact what you want to do on the next item.
yes, and I should have set this up a little bit, but I just want the committee members to know that I requested this item be brought. My staff has been working with MTS staff for the last couple of months, and this was what was in the APTA review as a potential enforcement model, the civil enforcement model. So that is where this is coming from, in case it seems that if it's coming out of the blue. We've just been working on a lot. It's been hanging kind of in the ether for 3 or 4 years, and just wanted to get it out so that we can actually discuss it no matter where folks land. So I just wanted to say that before I ask if there's any public comment, and then we'll go to discussion.
We do not have a public comment.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I know a lot of work went into this. I just want to address a couple of things. First, one is my general philosophy and principle that I think that we can decriminalize fare evasion and work to keep our line safe. I think it's possible. And so I'm always, especially with the next item that we're discussing, sort of the main part of that will be deciding what we do with the on-the-spot fare. I just want to make sure that this committee knows what is out there and what the options that we have before us. Two, I know Karen, you've been really doing a lot of back and forth on this, and I appreciate it. I would just say that a civil enforcement model is lawful, right? Like there are quite a few in the state, and we don't have a full legal analysis, but we do have quite a bit of case law that makes it clear that an officer can detain someone even if they're suspected of violating a civil law. It happens when folks are stopped while they're driving in their cars, and then eventually get detained, or if there is a subsequently a potential criminal violation. It happens a lot. So we don't see how it would be any different on this line. It's just sometimes it would seem it's a different class of people that we're working with sometimes. And so the way that the law currently reads, there can be, someone can be detained even with a civil enforcement model. We have Smith versus Kelly, we have the Chowdhury case. There are quite a few cases that state that. So what I want to be careful, especially when kind of going back with law enforcement, I really want to be careful as to their analysis, especially if they don't have anything backing it up, because I want us to be able to work together and not say, well, if we don't have it our way, then we don't want to be involved in the joint task force. I think that that is not fair to us, and it's not fair to the people that ultimately, no matter which enforcement model we pick, or if we stay the same, or do something that's a little bit more punitive wherever we go, we still need those partnerships, and we need to be above board in those partnerships. So when law enforcement comes to us, I just want them to fully have that analysis to back up what they're saying before they kind of almost threaten getting out of a partnership with us. I have a major problem with that. So I also just wanted to, I gave a little bit of history, but it has been 4 years since we've been kind of working on this issue and talking about these models. I personally think that the hybrid model is one that I would like to do a little bit more research into. The random nature, I think that some of the other transit agencies are saying is happening on the line doesn't seem acceptable to me.
Yeah.
I think that the way that I see it, right, is that if we do, what we have now is, yes, you go directly into a criminal process, but you can get out of that through the diversion program. The civil, in my mind, is just a flip of that. We begin with the civil process, right? If you don't comply with that, then you go into the criminal process. That was what a hybrid, in my mind, would be. Now, it will probably require more technology, as you mentioned at the end of the presentation, but I see it as a flip. That's kind of how I see it. So it's not you don't have to opt in, right?
Right.
You can follow this model, or then if you're a repeat violator, then you go to the criminal model. And the main reason why that I've always looked at this is because in the very beginning, when we were exploring different ways to keep the line safe and not be as punitive with fare evasions, because we did a whole study where people that were formerly homeless were coming back to us and saying, it's hard for us to get housing, it's hard for us to reintegrate back into the system, because we do have a lot of transit tickets for being on the line, right? So it was causing impediments for people who were really trying to get their lives together. So that's kind of how we got here. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say. I think for me, I would at the very least, like more information about the hybrid model. Because again, I think it is a flip. I think we've incorporated a lot of these things in the current diversion program we have now. But it just kind of, instead of an opt-in, it just gives the opportunity up front to have a civil process and not have this be sort of on a criminal record potentially, unless you are a repeat offender. So anyway, I will go to my board and start with Member Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair. I really heard and appreciated those comments framing this discussion. If we could dive deeper into one of those points and go back one slide. On the concerns on having a purely admin model, how are those affected by the hybrid model? Are they fully addressed? I understand that you said you want another legal opinion regardless, but do you think the concerns, particularly from the law enforcement partners, are addressed with a hybrid model?
So, I mean, I think certainly it's addressed with our current model because the umbrella is a criminal violation. And then as Supervisor Montgomery Stepp said, you offer an off-ramp. There's a way to get out of the criminal process by participating in diversion. And so the original citation is technically criminal, we just hold it back. We don't even send it to the court until you've told us if you're going to do diversion and giving you time to comply. The other programs, that are hybrid, again, it was a little strange to us, the information that we got, because it is a little ad hoc. It depends on just the chance of who approached you seemed to be more the way of if it was administrative or not. So I don't know if in those programs, since they still have a criminal violation on the books, so there's always that criminal violation that provides the reasonable suspicion and the right to detain in order to determine if you don't have a fare, and if you don't have a fare to write you a citation, and then they release you. So for me, absolutely, I do agree that administrative programs are lawful. I just don't, what are the rules around how we are allowed to approach and enforce? Are we allowed to tell someone you're not free to leave until I write you a citation, or are you allowed to kind of block their ability if they try to walk away from you? Are you allowed to kick them off the train if they don't? Those are questions that we would need to have asked, or answered if we wanted to kind of go down that road. I think our current program is protected and this isn't an issue. It's just if the administrative program is interpreted as removing the criminal citation from the whole process, then what does that mean? What are the rules we have to follow?
Yeah, and as to the hybrid model, it depends on who you talk to at the agencies. Part of it is they have multiple levels of security. Some are sworn officers and some are not. Who's checking will determine if it goes into a criminal or an administrative. And even in LA, Dan had conversations. Do you want to discuss?
Absolutely. Well, so thank you very much for being here. And I know these concerns are something that we need to address. It traditionally with law enforcement, as well as our public officers, when it comes to the detention of a person, it comes to constitutional issues when usually, in all cases are surrounded by a crime, meaning that it's going to be an infraction, a misdemeanor, a felony, an ordinance that's supported by these crimes as well. For example, a traffic stop, for example, is supported by the California Vehicle Code. They make the traffic stop. They are detained during that time for a short period, and the length of detention depends on the type of crime that it is for the person to identify themselves and to sign for a written promise to appear in court. So when we talk about law enforcement having some apprehension, generally law enforcement stays away from anything that's civil regulatory, anything that will end up in civil superior court and small claims court, and they're not allowed to intervene in any of these models. And generally they're just going to stay away from it because of the liability of unlawfully detaining someone or making an unlawful arrest for a civil regulatory issue. If there are issues, or if there are some things that we don't know about where we can actually detain a person for an administrative issue, then we would love to find those out. And those are issues that we need to look into. But based on all of our experience over the years, San Diego PD's experience, it just becomes an issue where we don't want to violate people's Fourth Amendment interests for an administrative penalty.
I think
Yeah,
that's,
and so when talking to different people at LA Metro, the person who's in charge of the administrative process says, oh, everything is administrative. There are no criminal cites. But then when you talk to the people who are actually citing people, there are criminal cites for fare evasion.
Yeah, there's no situation where we can detain a person from moving without something associated with a crime.
and for-
And in this case, when it comes to our CCIs, which are inspectors who are public officers who have the ability to detain people, who have the ability to the application of reasonable force if necessary. So that means they have that authority just by their mere presence and a demand for ID or something like that would give a reasonable person the belief that they're detained and not free to leave. So in this case, under the administrative model, we would likely have to at least give them the admonishment that you are not being detained and you are free to leave at any time during this interaction, which is called a consensual contact versus a detention or an arrest.
And those, I mean, I think obviously for me, ultimately, if we wanted to explore this more, we would commission a legal opinion that would analyze these statutes, confirm that they're purely administrative, and then set what the rules are. And that could either set rules that the board is comfortable with. It could lead us to ask for some legislative authority that would confirm that the administrative penalty program still gives the right to detain. I don't know if that's possible or what, but that would just be kind of fleshing out what are the rules. That would also enable us to have an informed discussion with PD and law enforcement partners, because right now we don't have, the opinion to then start that discussion and really be able to like have a back and forth.
And like the chair, the personal preference would be to have as little criminalization of this process as possible. But I also understand the importance there of having a role, a portion of it in the hybrid model that allows to address those legal concerns, especially for our law enforcement partners. So speaking to those hybrid models, if we could go back to the one that had BART up there as one of the examples, I thought that one did, no, the one that I'll, this one, it is. Perfect. And BART was a model that I wanted to point to as being relatively similar to something that I would be comfortable if we get to the point where we want to step away from the current diversion program and have a hybrid model. I think BART seems to be a good example as far as a process, as far as the penalties. I am not excited about having higher penalties for subsequent violations. In fact, I think the only thing that should happen is that at some point it turns into a criminal process. It sounds like that would even be easier for the enforcement agencies as well, as less punitive. And similarly, late fees, although I understand the idea that we should have some kind of benefit for people who pay immediately, subsequent late penalties, and then a second late penalty on top of that. I don't have a lot of support for, simply because I think this is not a, from what I've heard from the board and my personal preference, we're not looking at this as a money-making effort as much as a diversion effort that will allow our tolls to be the money-making effort. So for that, I'll point to those as being the caveats, where otherwise I think the BART would be a great example to move forward with as having something to explore as a hybrid model. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just I have to read this case law. Chowdhury, United States v. Chowdhury, stands for the proposition that police can briefly detain people when they suspect of violating civil laws that permit them to issue citations, and that they may act accordingly if they lawfully uncover evidence of criminal activity during that detention. Committee member Dillard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Karen, for all the extensive work that you've done for this. There's a lot of details included in this presentation, so I just want to back up to some things that I didn't hear about that I would like to know if that's a possibility that we could entertain these options. And that is, like, right now, people see security on and off. It's not a whole lot of times. I ride the trolley, especially to get to MTS and Sandag. I don't see any officers that often. So is there a way, as we roll out whatever it is that we roll out, whatever it is that we just decide to do, some, maybe some signs that could be posted about how much people can get in trouble for not paying? Just warning, maybe something inside that's lit up that everybody can read or see. Just like we have, the rolling text that goes across for, the next stop, that kind of thing. And then also something on the platform that reminds people that if they take the trolley and they don't pay, that they can get in a lot of trouble. I think that we don't really have a culture of that right now. And I think that would, be something where we could start to create a culture. The other thing that I was going to ask is, I'm not good at law. Never been to law school, and I don't know much about the criminal action. But the way that I see this is, if you get on the trolley and you know you're supposed to pay, then you're stealing if you didn't. So at what level is it inappropriate to detain them? So I'm having trouble with that, like, how does that work? If someone doesn't have proof that they've paid, then if they're riding, they're going for free and it's not free. So maybe help me with that.
So the detention is just the brief moment of I've contacted you, I've asked
Right.
you with a fare, for a fare, you don't have proof of a fare. So that's a violation currently, of the criminal statute. It's an infraction, but it is a violation. And so the detention is just, in this interaction, you have to talk to me and you have to stay and give me your information so I can write down a citation, and then you can go appear in court to argue why you don't think you should have gotten it. So the detention is just to say, hey, you're not allowed to leave or refuse to cooperate with me in providing your information to write you the citation. So it's not a detention like we take them to a jail cell or something like
Right,
that.
I
It's
understood
just
that.
blocking their path,
Okay.
and not allowing them, to leave, if that we just want to write the citation and move
Mhm.
on, is our goal with our officers in the training.
My frustration, Chair, is that in some of the public safety meetings that we've had in the past and trying to acquire data, and how, what these interactions are like for our officers who are trying to detain or whatever. And of course, we get the public safety report that shows that, people refuse to either speak to the officer, they walk off. Based on the report, I don't have one in front of me right now, but I get them weekly. But my point is that because there's no culture really in place that has really been efficient in making people take this more seriously, I'll just say that. I feel like maybe we could do something a little bit more harsh in the beginning, and then as we've created that culture, start to tone it down a little bit, because I do like the hybrid part of this. And I agree that if we have something that is really, snaps people into place at first and goes, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay what, that, the word will get out. Because right now the word is out that, hey, you can jump on the trolley and the chances of you getting caught is pretty low. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I would like to see something there. Of course, once you start getting into the, actually where there's a criminal part where we're getting into, further citations or repeat offenders, that kind of thing. I worry about in certain areas that we might fall into the old trap that we've talked about before, where it ends up being disproportionate. And I'm wondering if at that particular point, that yes, we have something where we're compromising on, if you do volunteer time, we will deduct from that initial penalty or, whatever has been acquired based on the behavior of the participant or the patron. And then, I don't know, somehow allow them to report their financial situation. If they're, maybe they're working, but they're only making minimum wage, it doesn't really make sense. Like, it could take them forever, and then ruin their lives in the process. And so I worry a little bit about that as far as people who just literally cannot afford. And I'll give you a good example. If you ride the blue line heading south from MTS, or you ride the orange line heading east, either way, for both, there's a lot of working class. They're working class. A lot of them may be like hourly wage, they're not, making more than $50,000 a year or something. And with all of the expense that it costs to live here, it might be a struggle for them, even if they, screwed up and didn't pay the ticket or the citation. And so I'm just a little worried about things being disproportionate in regards to people that just don't have the means. And so I don't know what kind of way that we could balance that. Whereas if we're in another part of the county, we may not have as many of those issues. I'm not saying we won't have any, but we won't have a disproportionate amount of, because usually those are the people that use the bus lines and the trolley lines are people who either don't have cars or this is their only way to get back and forth to work, et cetera. So there's a lot here with your presentation, but I think that at the top of my mind when I'm thinking about all these different ways to deal with, crunching down and making people understand this is a serious matter. And I also think that it is about the money. We're losing over $1 million a month right now. So it is about the money. It is about making patrons pay. So I would like to, I don't know, figure out how we can cover some of these issues so I could feel comfortable that we're not doing things that are maybe work out fairly in parts of our city, but then completely be not as able to overcome in other areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's what makes this so hard
Yeah.
because I've seen it. I've seen when we had the beat system and when we were really modeled off of much more of enforcement and before we had any of these programs and what the numbers looked like when we came back. Now we had a lower percentage. We were not losing as much money. But we were also issuing a lot of tickets, which don't necessarily result in money. They result in, this following people throughout their lives. So that's what's hard about it. But to your point, the signage and the platform ideas, also in lighting, those are a part of the peer review too that we did. Those were all in there as suggestions of, how to improve. That's what makes this so hard. Because I've kind of seen both, and we have to take into consideration the switch to Pronto and the stored value. We went over that data. All of it is very dense. We need to see it like 10 times over, but there are a lot of different things that are contributing to that number right now. I don't want to say this is not one of them, right? I'm not saying that at all, but there are a lot of changes that have happened in the last 3 years. And I think, we can't just put it to one thing. Last thing I'll say is when people speed and could potentially murder folks on the road, they don't go to jail for murder, right? They get a ticket if they don't hurt anyone. And so we have to just be careful about the way that we're looking at our riders and then, people who drive. I think that the system has inherently been a little bit biased. But that's what I'm just trying to compare to, like, how do we treat people? Right? Like, what is the appropriate form of, I didn't pay, $5. The issue is philosophical, right? Does that leads into a culture of not paying? That's what we're dealing with here. Okay, let me, you have any
Well,
last comments and I'll go to member.
Just in response
Member Hall.
to what you're saying is maybe to keep it where it's equitable would be to have a program for those who feel like it is a hardship
And
you
we-
know, and some
to
kind of
staff's
proof.
credit, we do that now.
Yeah.
That is
But
done.
it's
That's part
not
of the-
really known on the platform or inside. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying we can find other ways to get that word out. So if someone would want to apply to something like that, they would have to prove that, you know, there is a hardship, but it would be a way to keep it equitable.
And I'll just say, that's why I kind of.
Maybe not foolproof, but
Yeah, like it helps. I think the hybrid model does that, and here's why. Because you don't have to opt into the current program we have now. You are a part, you are initially a part of that, instead of initially being a part of a criminal process, if you don't apply for the diversion. So to me, that's the difference. So if we get rid of we'll talk about that next item, but if we say we get rid of on the spot and we get rid of those things, in my mind, the civil process flips what we have now to where we can graduate up to the criminal, but the original interaction is, here's a civil process. We're not trying to ruin your life, but you didn't pay. Right?
Exactly.
And so it just, and then we're not changing anything today. At the most, we're going to ask staff to come back to answer some more of these questions. So we'll see what happens. And let's go to Member Hall.
thank you.
All right. Quick question for Dan Brislin. The administrative, the hybrid, does that still keep enough of the criminal, in your opinion, to be able to detain him?
In my opinion, if there's a criminal element to the detention, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Karen?
Because generally it means that a reasonable suspicion to detain someone means a reasonable person must believe a crime is occurring, has occurred, or about to occur, and the person that has committed that offense is the one that you're detaining. And generally that would satisfy it.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree that
Okay.
our current model, our hybrid model satisfies that. And if we switch to a different type of hybrid model, we would make sure, or the goal would be to like resolve that legal concern. So,
Well, ultimately, if we switch to purely administrative, I see this as a lawsuit waiting to happen. I don't like lawsuits waiting to happen. We would definitely we'll be in court, we'll be arguing it out, we'll be in closed session, and we'll have to do that. So we need to keep some of the criminal in just to back us up. Do we have any figures at all on the amounts of money we're losing or anything like that, or?
so I did update our stats for the next agenda item. So just in
Okay.
general for fair evasion, it's consistent with what we were estimating in June.
Okay.
You know, it's ticked up a tiny percentage, but we think it's somewhere between 10 and $13 million a year. So a little over, $1 million a month is what we've seen from our Pronto data analysis. And then finance has a different calculation they did that I don't know what that formula is that also comes up with that number. So we seem to be checking each other.
Percentage wise, where are we right now?
For fair
For fair
evasion,
evasion?
we are at 32.48% for
What's-
calendar year 2024 through August.
32%. What's the federal government allow?
They don't have,
I thought they had to get funding, you had to have, was it state then, or is it?
their state TDA, and I
Yeah,
honestly.
that's in discussion with the TDA reforms that we're trying to get. But currently, there's a formula based on when they created TDA, what your fare box recovery was at that time, and where it could move.
Okay.
And
Are we-
that's slightly different from its fare box recovery, but it also is against your expenses. So like how much revenue do you come in that's paying for your expenses, is my
Right.
understanding.
So, or do we run into any problems in the future if we don't correct this?
Well, the change at the state level, if they rescind, because right now they're not enforcing that, and they haven't been since the
Wasn't-
pandemic.
Assuming they do.
But if they change the legislation, then we won't have a fare box recovery ratio requirement.
Okay, so we're headed that way. And we'll just assume that they do reinstate it. It's nice to say, it's kind of like the money, the 125 million. We don't the SB 125 is what I meant. You know, we have the money coming and then they go, yep, sorry. And then we have the money coming. So we can't really depend on what we think is going to happen. We have to depend on reality, and that could be reality. So we need to work on this right now because we're going to look pretty bad if that hits. I don't want to lose any funding. We have enough problems as it is. If we're losing $1 million a month, we're going to be out of business real fast. And I've been saying that for years, that we're on a timetable, and we have to make sure that we work on this timetable. You know, if it's $1 million here, it's $1 million there, but overall it becomes real money, and all of a sudden we're upside down. I would like to see how bad the rest of the agencies are, how we compare with them. I know we've done that before, but I'd like to see where we are for the next meeting on where we are and how we're going to end up in, 2028 is what I'm hearing now, but
I don't have completely verified stats, but when we did our survey, MTS right now is at about a 24% fare box recovery ratio. There were a couple of other agencies that were in the low 20s, and most of the others are much lower. They're like 9%,
Yeah.
5%.
and
So we certainly don't want to slide
And
lower. I mean, that's overall just budget discussions.
And some that have a hybrid model
Right.
have lower. They did, like I said, it's a lot of changes, but I think you have some of that in the next presentation
I
too.
do, yes.
Because it's a little bit more on point to the direct funding and the 32% that we're looking at, $1 million a month.
Yeah. Oh, can you turn your microphone on?
I'm gonna let Member Hall finish and then go to Member Rodriguez, because I think that is for the next, that they'll have the answers to the next one, because we have to make decisions about what we're going to recommend to the board around the diversion program and how it's impacting the budget.
well, again, the one that makes final decisions, the guy in the black robe or the lady in the black robe. And the reality is we have to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a position that's going to get us in a lawsuit and we have problems. That's why I'm okay with maybe going with that. I don't think we need to really, I say I'm a lot more liberal than everybody else. I think give them a $25 fine until they prove me wrong. It's the guy that's been 151 times. I remember that one. That's the one I want to look for. And those people, and the 50 times and the 40 times, those are the people we need to grab and kick them off the train completely, kick it off the trolley completely. And those are the ones, because they're also probably the ones causing the problems. And I've asked people before, I said, if they're committing a crime, are we checking their fare? Chances are we're not. I'm hoping we have started now, but I bet you they're not paying their fare either. So they're causing problems as they get on that train. So I would be okay with this if we do it. I want to keep it more of a criminal up front. I don't care how it is. I don't want to put people in jail, frankly. I want to make it where we have the ability to protect ourselves, but at the same time, I don't want to put somebody in jail for not paying $5 or $250 really. And that's what we need to work on. So.
Thank you, sir. Member Rodriguez.
Oh, there we go. It's a new system. No, I understand. Thank you so much for staff for all the research and presentation. Very much appreciated. I got a couple questions for me to kind of get a better grasp. Do the aversions or folks that don't necessarily pay, do they happen more in the trolley system or in the bus?
Trolley.
In the trolley?
Yeah.
Do you know what kind of percentage, give or take?
So I don't know percentage, but we have a 3% evasion rate on bus because people have to walk by, they have to pay at the fare box as they enter the bus. Whereas at the trolley, we're at 32%.
Okay.
So it's 10 times more on trolley because there's not that gatekeeper. I think if you have to blatantly walk by someone and say, I'm not going to pay, at least people generally feel bad about that and, will pay. But if there's nobody there to see them not paying, it seems like it's a lot easier to just walk on and take your chances.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And how do the other agencies, you mentioned BART, VTA, Caltrain, and a few others, how do they deal with the administrative citations? Because I don't know if it was clear earlier in the explanation. How do they deal with it?
Again, I certainly can dive a little bit deeper, but both BART and Caltrain follow pretty much the process that's set out for the administrative penalty. So that hearing process that I told you about, they do that for those first couple of sites. And then it sounds like for the third site, it can escalate to criminal.
Okay. And but when it comes to actually handing a ticket, right? Who does that?
I have to confirm, I have it in my notes. Some of them have, like, they have hybrid officers. So like our officers are, public officers are not law enforcement officers. And so they'll have fair enforcement officers. But then most of those other agencies also contract with local PD and sheriff to specifically and exclusively patrol their system. So at any given time, a person can be approached by either just a fair enforcement officer that's more like what our officers are, or a true law enforcement peace officer status person.
But under the legal term, does our fair enforcement officer have the authority to stop somebody
Yes.
and actually provide them a citation?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's good to clarify. I do have another question. So we mentioned, can you mention again the amount of funding or money we are losing as a result of riders not necessarily paying?
So in general, if we calculate out the number of people we think are not paying based on the Pronto data, that calculates to about $1 million to $1.2 million a month. So it's between $10 and $13 million a year.
That those folks are not paying.
Correct.
What would happen if they don't ride the trolley at all? The question that I'm getting to is like, what would happen if these individuals that don't pay, don't ride the trolley? Do our expenses go up or down?
I mean, if certain people aren't paying, then maybe we don't need as much service out there, but we haven't done that analysis. But, right now we're just putting, one thing that through the various budget processes that we've done is people have said they'd like to see, they'd rather pay more for a fare and have more service than pay less for a fare and have less service. And so I think in general, and I am not the planner, Dennis is the one that can talk about this off the top of his head. But I think the philosophy has been, we want to be able to have the funding to put as much service out there to drive as many people to transit. And part of that funding to put that service on the street comes from fares. Part of it comes from subsidy, but until we can plug that fare hole with subsidy, then, we want to have that pot be as big as possible so we can have as much service.
Yeah, frequently people say, oh, well, you still have a seat on the train and you're going to run the train anyway. So why do you care if that person paid or not? And the gist of it is we still have the operational costs associated with running that train. And so if 10 people are splitting that cost versus 11 people, then you're going to have that, you're going to have to either raise fares or cut service in order to accommodate the people who have decided not to pay the fare.
I completely understand. And maybe this is kind of getting to the heart of a ideologically separate perspective, because I believe that increasing fares will inevitably leave some individuals to not ride our transit line, which we want to get to the point where everybody can ride it everywhere in the region. Right. So I think for me, it becomes a very difficult balance when we look at individuals that may not pay their fair share, and they should. But if they don't, instead of having a punitive approach, even to the point of some prison time or getting something on a permanent record, which then becomes really difficult to get jobs, to get a house, to get apartments. I don't think we should get to that point. So it does become a very difficult balance for me. I like the idea of some very kind of common sense things, like there's a fee when somebody doesn't pay, right? I mean, that's just, we should do more of that. But we should also be, I think, thinking of ways to generate additional revenue in order for us to get to the point where everybody can ride our transit system at a very reasonable price. And so I do support the hybrid approach. And I completely understand our agency and agency staff looking at funding that doesn't come in when it should. Because, we all represent cities and very similar things happen to us, right? We deal with a specific issue. And when we tally up all the hours that we put into that issue, there's a figure associated with that. But if we wouldn't be doing that, we would be working on another issue that would, so it's like it constantly becomes, I think, a way in which we need to get to the point where, looking at the big picture, we provide as accessible transit ridership as possible. And so I want us to hopefully think of that as we go forward, as we continue to look at this particular issue, because if all these folks suddenly don't ride the trolley, we're still going to have a trolley. And it's not like all that money will be lost. It'll just be nowhere, which is where it is now. So how do we encourage them to pay and make it more easier for folks to pay, and at the same time make it more effective for everybody to utilize your transit system?
Thank you very much for that. Was that?
That was it.
Okay,
Thanks.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. We have in our own legislative platform, we are charging the agency to look at how to eliminate the requirement of this fare box recovery model and replace it with state or federal funding, and also just to see how many different ways we can make this a free service for the people who actually need it. So we're just trying to balance a lot of things as is staff. So I do appreciate your comments, and also the stored value. I keep going back to that, but there's money like in the bank that is not used yet because of the way that we changed the system. And so at last count, I thought it was around 8 million, but I could be wrong. Is it?
Yes, though by accounting principles, we're not allowed to use that. That would be one-time money.
Yes.
Though I don't think I have a slide on it in my next presentation.
Okay,
so-
okay,
yeah.
we'll go there, but my point is, it's a different setup and a different model than what we've been basing these decisions on before. So when we have a different model, we need to explore different methodology to analyze the best policies for what we're doing. So, okay, I'm gonna put a motion on the floor based on our conversation to direct staff to bring something back to the committee around digging in deeper onto this hybrid model. And I think, Karen, you had a number 15 where you kind of said these things to consider, to kind of go a little bit deeper into those, including some of the questions that some of the committee members had. And
Yes.
then that way we're not rushing anything, right? We're getting those questions answered. In the meantime, we'll make a decision based on that and just come back to committee. If we see anything that needs to go to the board, then we'll make the decision at that time.
Okay, I have some notes of things to follow up with, but I'll follow up with the chair's office if I
Okay,
have questions on like the scope of what I should present for the next meeting.
absolutely appreciate that. So that is a motion. Can I have a second? Okay, good. I have seconds.
Voting system, we'd have to read. No, can we do a voice vote?
Yes, no problem. We can do a voice vote. So we have a motion and a second on the floor, and we'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Montgomery Stepp,
Yes.
Dillard,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Aye.
Hall.
I tried.
The motion passes with 5 members voting yes and 1 absence.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Sharon. And the entire public security team, thank you so much for everything that you're doing around this. It's tough conversations. Okay, let's go to our last item. Fair enforcement diversion program modifications. And I think, Karen, you're doing the presentation for us. And so please proceed.
I am. It's me again. This is mostly the same presentation that I gave on June 7th, but with the request for a recommendation and at the board. I did update the statistics from the last meeting. So there's a few changes that are in there because I went back and checked to see if the data had changed. So I will walk you through this. We just talked about our fair enforcement, the diversion program, but just as a reminder, we've had it in place since September of 2020. It's been called a pilot, but the board, while we haven't made it absolutely permanent, we have just been continuing it until the board gives us direction to do something different. That all fare evasion violations are eligible unless it's coupled with another violation. So if somebody is cited for vandalism or assault or failure to comply, and also had a fare evasion violation, then they're not eligible. But if all that you were cited for is fare evasion, everybody can do diversion. You can do it every single time you get cited. So there's certainly not, like, you only get to do it once or something like that at this point. What the current options is that they allow someone to immediately purchase a fare, which is the $2.50 one-way ticket, either at a ticket vending machine or on the Pronto validation app. That's really what we're here to talk about today, and eliminating that option. The other features of it is if you do receive the citation, you are given, information about the diversion program that would allow you, to appeal within 15 days if you think you shouldn't have gotten it, or within 120 days, you can pay that reduced fine of $25. And you have all 120 days to do that. So you have 4 months. So we would accept installment payments if somebody wanted to do that. Or complete 3 hours of community service within that 4-month period. And we've identified some community service organizations that we can direct people to. We also are open to whatever community service organization they may want to. We just do a little bit of vetting to make sure that it's not, babysitting for their best friend, as community service. But in general, if it's a community service organization or a charity, then we accept those hours. And then if they don't do anything or don't complete it, if they've done partial completion, we absolutely would extend that 120-day period. But if they don't do anything or they don't participate, then it gets sent to court after that 120-day period expires.
And Karen, since it was brought up in the last questioning on the last agenda item, how do we communicate the availability of the diversion program to people who are getting citations?
It is given, a fact sheet about it is given to them when they're given a citation. So, and then we also have it on our website for them to go back to. And we've talked about this before, and I think that it came up in the last presentation, but the policy goals of when the board approved and instituted the diversion program was to meet 2 goals, of the program, or of the policy goals of the agency, which is we're trying to reduce the financial impact of fare evasion. And so because we've got this structural deficit, we want to give people a reason and to pay their fine, that it's not so easy to not pay their fare. And so we want there to be that incentive to pay the transit fare, but we wanted a non-criminal path for resolving the citation. And we were trying to more equitably and proportionally align what the penalty for fare violation is with what the violation is. And so that's why instead of having it automatically go to court, automatically be a $75 fine plus all the court fees, requiring you to take a day off of work to go to court, all of those things. That's why the board approved this significantly reduced fine of $25 and 3 hours of community service. And you could just do it. You don't have to come and take time off of work to try to handle this. And so that was how it was structured and what we were trying to achieve when we put it together. I think I already kind of just talked about it, but it was the civil justice goal behind this was that non-criminal path and a more aligned penalty. And so, that fine is $25 instead of what we had calculated at court is over $192 if you go that path. The community service option, the hours is significantly reduced on what you would get if you went to court, because this is still an option there. And then we put in place that expedited informal appeal process for citations that have a factual defense. So if you really felt like righteously that you shouldn't have gotten the citation, you don't have to take the day off of court or of work to go to court and plead your case. We're open. We don't want to have a citation issued to you if we look at the information and determine, yeah, that actually wasn't fair. We shouldn't have done that. We want that ability to make it right away. Because again, our goal is we want people to pay their fare. So if they were trying to pay their fare or they did pay their fare, but they couldn't prove it, that's all we want is, oh, you did what we wanted you to do. Hopefully next time you'll have your fare with you or something like that. And then again, because of the civil justice goals, and we understand that some people get a little in deep before they're ready to kind of take control of their life and make things better. We're trying to be flexible to meet those people where they are and come up with a solution. Because again, the goal is just to convince the community as a whole and individuals, it's better, please just pay your fare. So looking at the program, and again, this is leading to, our ultimate recommendation is that the board remove the option to buy the fare on the spot, which we think has undermined really participation in the diversion program and people recognizing how fair and equitable it is, because the people that maybe would participate in diversion never get there because they use this $2.50 off ramp each time. And so one thing that we talked about last month was that our diversion program, so the fare evasion rate that we talk about, it tells us what percentage of passengers are riding without paying their fare. And you have to understand also like this issue with the two different fare systems we had. Under the Compass card system that was in place until August of 2021, you were encouraged to purchase a pass in advance of your rides because you got a discount if you bought that pass in advance. So you would buy a day pass for $6 and then you got to ride as many times as you wanted during the day. Whereas if you paid as you went, you would end up spending more. Same thing with the monthly pass. If you bought your monthly pass in advance, you got that volume discount. Whereas if you pay as you go, you would pay a lot more than $72 a month. So people saw that as a deal and they bought their passes in advance. And so we got our money in advance and we were able to count it as fair value. With the Pronto system that went into place essentially in October of 2021, I've left September 2021 out because we did a free ride month to encourage people to transition over from the programs. But that does not require the pass purchase to earn those discounts that you used to. You used to have to buy the pass in order to get the volume discount. And now it allows you to pay as you go, and then it just caps you. So as soon as you do enough rides to earn a day pass, then it will never charge you more than the day pass in that day. And then similarly with the monthly pass. And so there's just a different way for passenger mindset of how they get their discount and how they get a good deal on transit. But the issue with Pronto is that then to keep people honest, they have to tap every single time for us to get our end of the deal that we're offering them with how they calculate fares and charge you in Pronto. We went over this before, but there's various different ways that we can try to calculate what our fare evasion rate is. And we have settled, as we've looked through the different sources and how reliable they are, that the two most reliable and comprehensive ways is to look at when we do the special enforcement details, what their percentage is, because that's when the security detail officers check every passenger for a fare in a closed environment. So people can't kind of walk away and avoid it. And so there's no ability to avoid inspection. So we think that's pretty accurate judgment. And then now that we have voluminous Pronto inspection validation app data, which is showing so this only works if you have a Pronto card. If you have a paper ticket, it doesn't necessarily, but very few people use paper tickets now. But so the inspectors go and look at your pass and see if there's money on it, and if you've validated and paid your fare. And then if you don't, so it'll tell you of all the people that they checked, how many had a valid fare on it, how many didn't. It'll tell you what type of fare they had. And then in the validation app, that is where we gave with this $2.50, on the spot payment, we give our officers the ability to take, if they have stored value, to validate it right there on the spot. So it'll tell us how many people paid on the spot, with all of those inspections. And so we've used those statistics to also calculate how many people, if you're buying a fare on the spot, then that meant you didn't have a fare, and it'll also tell us when you inspected it. And we've tried to separate the data because you can't combine it together because there's duplication. There's somebody that a passenger got inspected and then they got validated. And so that might get counted twice. So we're looking at these kind of as two separate data sets. The other ones are just a little bit too anecdotal. The Sandag ride check surveys, those are people on the honor system telling a person that it comes and approaches them, how did you pay your fare today? So they are just, reporting, on the honor system if they paid their fare or not. And so we think that there's a certain amount of people that might be not telling the truth when they tell somebody like if they bought a fare or not that day. So with this Pronto data that we have, what we have been seeing since it was instituted, the program went online in October of 2021. We didn't start having this inspection app data until May of 2022. So that's when our data set starts. But we now have over 2 years worth of data. And it's showing that people are seeing the value of our stored value and this fare capping and the pay as you go to earn your discounts in that. But what we're also seeing is that stored value evasion rate is increasing and past product use is decreasing. So fewer people are just saying, you know what, I know I'm going to ride and I just want to pay my $72 at the beginning of the month and be done with it. Instead, they're doing I'm going to use stored value to earn my monthly pass. And so we really need to make sure we either want to encourage people to still buy a pass, or we want to make sure that if they're earning their pass discount through stored value, that they're tapping every single time they ride. We have increased our transit officers and inspection. The board has approved some increases and we're slowly getting those officers online. The last time I brought this to the committee, we were inspecting between 3 to 5% of passengers. It's now closer to 6% now that we've gotten, so over the whole time period, it's 3 to 6%. In 2024, it's closer to between 5 and 6% of passengers get checked. So that's an increase, but it's still a tiny segment, because it means 94% of our passengers when they ride don't get checked. If you look at, we've slowly increased. So for the people with a valid fare and pass products in 2022, 29% had one. 2023, it was 24%. And now in 2024, only 20% are buying the pass products and using those. Then the people who are having no valid fare and using stored value has gone up. In 2022, it was 22.47%. 2023, it's 29%. And now through August, it's 32.5% of people are using, that's how they're paying is stored value, but they're not paying, so like 1/3 of the time of the people that use stored value basically aren't paying. I had previously before this no stored value, like all that difference, it's about 10%. We're not really concerned about that 10% because those are people who had a past product, but they just didn't tap it that day, and so we don't really consider that in the fare evasion bucket. That's the type of thing that if somebody got a citation for that, we would dismiss it because they've paid their money. We have it in advance. So really what we're concerned about is the people that are paying as they go through stored value. This is just kind of some of the concerning trends that just shows, and it really, if you look at in 2021, and this is only our trolley ridership. So like that's not our overall system ridership, but we're looking at the trolley fare revenue that we've received and the trolley ridership. And it used to be that for every passenger, we got a little bit over $1 per passenger per ride. Like that was the average cost of a ride for us to supply that service, or the average fare that people were paying. And it has then slowly decreased. So 2021, when we introduced Pronto towards the end of the year, we went down to 86 cents per fare. Then in 2023, we went down to 73 cents. And the thing per average fare, and the thing that was significant on that is that we had a 4 million increase in ridership between 2022 and 2023. And we had almost $600,000 loss. So we brought in $600,000 less trolley revenue, but we had over 4 million more passengers. And so that was kind of a concerning trend where we used to be, if we'd had 38 million passengers, we would have around $38 million of revenue. And now we're having $28 million of revenue. It ticked up a tiny bit in 2024. We actually are at 77 cents, per ride. But it's still that same significant difference. And annualized based on where we are through, this data is only through July because we don't have the ridership and fare revenue for August yet. But we're looking at expecting around 39 million passengers, but only $30 million worth of revenue. Which I went and looked back, that's actually our passenger, if we continue at the same rate for 2024, our passenger numbers will be the same as in 2014, which, but we had $40 million worth of revenue in 2014. And we would have 30 million in 2024. So using the evasion rates and some of then these average fare numbers, we were trying to calculate what is that revenue loss based on the various different numbers. And so we have basically, estimated that from that May 2022 time period through July, that we have lost somewhere between 17 and $23 million. But that's increasing. So it was less money in the 2022, less money in 2023. It's increasing each year. And so the annualized estimate, as we said before, is between 10 and $13 million a year of revenue loss that we're seeing. We then did a Pronto card analysis to figure out, well, how many individual people is this that is doing the fare evasion? And we updated the data through August of 2024. And it's similar to what the statistics were when we brought this to you last. 92,000 people have done a buy on the spot once, which like in a way that would be great. That means 92,000 people got caught once. They either just haven't been caught again, or they learned their lesson, or it was a one-time mistake that they meant to pay, but they didn't. And, they've learned the system since then. But there's another just under 60,000 who have done multiple violations. And that's where we're really concerned about, because that accounts for over 1 million buy on the spot transactions. And really when we look at that is if 1 million people are only paying the $2.50 when they're approached by it, then that means 94% of the time they're not paying at all. And so we want them to pay every time, not only when they're approached by one of our officers. And so that is like, it's not a small number of people that over almost 60,000 people, because that's individual Pronto accounts, are deciding more than once to buy on the spot. That just led us to believe that some people think, and it really is, like right now, it's within the rules of our program. Our program says, if you don't buy a fare, then we just want you to buy a fare right then. And so that's like within the rules. So I feel like even people that are stricter rule follower people don't actually feel like they're doing anything wrong, because it's part of the options that we give them. And so, but it's not an insignificant number of our riders that are doing this, I guess is our main concern. So how do we change that mindset? This was another chart. I didn't update it from the last presentation. It just shows we fully recognize that one of the shifts of, it wasn't the diversion program itself that made this change. It was Compass Card and Pronto operate very differently. And Pronto is extremely reliant on you tapping every time and paying every time. And it creates these loopholes where it's easier to not pay your fare. And then coupled with the diversion program, giving this kind of rule following way to not tap, that's what we think it has. But if you look at this, the red block is trolley ridership, and the red line is trolley fare revenue. And so it shows when we switched over to Pronto, we had this huge drop in the connection between that trolley fare revenue kind of being equal to ridership.
And I should clarify, Karen, what you said was that the diversion program, it's not the diversion program that contributes to the willingness not to pay. It's the add-on of, we're going to let you pay on the spot if you don't do anything.
Yes. Like, I think just the way that Pronto operates, it like, allows people to potentially game the system. And the $2.50 on the spot option just makes that very easy. Like,
The fee associated with the diversion program is still an incentive for people to pay.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the diversion program is very valuable. We want it. It's only this on the spot payment issue that we want to discuss with you all. I don't think creating a diversion program is why that number went down. I think it was the two things colliding at the same time of the shift of how you pay for Pronto, how you get your discounts, how we do our fare enforcement, and that a lot of it is on the honor system. So that's essentially what, we've been saying is that we just think that the buy on the spot option, when it was paired with the new Pronto fare capping system, created this loophole that almost encourages fare evasion, because you only need to purchase a fare if you're inspected by the officer. And since, again, only 3 to 6% of passengers are being inspected, that means we're not receiving that buy on the spot fare payment from 94% of our riders. Again, if it's technically, you're not breaking the rules if you do that. Like, we've said that that's a valid way to pay your fare. And so it doesn't appear that it's giving people an incentive to change their behavior, that when they do the buy on the spot, maybe 2,000 people did say, I'm going to change my behavior, but 60,000 did not. This is just, we've been talking about these various issues for the last year and a half. I'm sure we'll be talking about them well into that. I would love to be able to bring you presentations on how effective the diversion program is going and how people are participating in it. But it has been that not many people participate in the diversion program, except maybe on the appeals because of this buy on the spot. So I don't have good data for you on that. So our recommendation is that the Public Security Committee forward a recommendation to the board to remove the on-the-spot payment. One of the things, maybe I accidentally deleted a slide. Our proposal was that we would implement, so we would remove on-the-spot payment, but then two things that we really think will improve participation and the ease of using the diversion program is to implement an online and phone payment options for that $25 fine. Because right now they either have to send us a check or they have to come to the transit store. And so to the extent that somebody, we want to make it more similar to what you're allowed to do if you get a parking ticket or a traffic ticket, that you can just go online and pay it. I think that'll help us staff-wise if we have an influx of people having to participate in the diversion program. If they can pay online or via phone, that is easier to manage. And it also, if there had been some discussions of, could we just change the on-the-spot payment to $25? And I have just some practical concerns about how we would implement that, and would that change the nature of some of the interactions with our officers. But if we have an online payment option, basically somebody could, like, I'm going to give you this ticket, but you can go online and pay it right now if you want, and so that would allow them to get rid of it. So I'm done. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you very much. I just want to check in and see if we have any public comment.
We do not.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's start with Member Hall. Oh, you're so,
To myself.
yes, you are. Thank you. Because I'm really not trying to mute you. Okay, Member Hall.
So, just real quick on the fees, it's just, it's every time if they get caught, it's they
Yes.
can pay it, okay. So, or do we have the capability of going, maybe like the third time you're out, then it is $25, or do we have that ability if necessary?
Right now, we do not have the ability for officers to know when they're citing someone if they've cited them before. I mean, unless like that officer knows that person,
Yeah.
but so right now we only could do that. And we've questioned of like, well, could you do it on the back end? You're going to give you a citation if you don't, they'll check and see if you've done this before. If you've done it more than twice, then you're going to be sent straight to court. Like potentially we could do that, but we like it as a de-escalation tactic for our officers too, to be able to be like, I'm giving you a citation. If you don't do anything about it, it's going to go to court. But, they've got a diversion program of, instead of that, you can do these things.
Okay. All right. And then are that $25, is that including credit card fees or are we adding those in?
It's everything. So we don't add a fees on top of that.
Okay, should we?
I think that we really just want to have the fine be enough where it's more than that $2.50. And so it's maybe goes into the calculus of this isn't worth it. But we're not like the extra 3% that we might charge to cover, you know, a credit card fee. We don't charge our passengers when they buy our fares. You know, when they buy stored value, we don't charge them a credit card fee.
That's getting to be pretty popular right now, so we
Yeah.
might want to look at that. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder, I did request that this come back to public security with an actual recommendation for the board. So we will need a motion and I will go to Member Dillard.
I just wanted to make clear about the deterrence portion. Do you think it's better to have an immediate fee for whether they're, you know, since we can't figure out whether they're first time, second time, or 50 time immediately, would it be better to just say, you know, because you didn't pay, now you have to pay a penalty to stay on the trolley? Or are the officers just saying you have to get off if you're not going to pay? That's one thing. And then number two, should it be the same amount? Because if you charge them immediately for not paying when they were supposed to pay, maybe that fee could be maybe a little bit of a smaller fee versus giving a citation and just going with that. I mean, do you have any recommendation on
Well,
what
I
you
can-
think would be easiest?
So we did have this pretty robust discussion about this at the last Public Security Committee. The challenge, there's a couple challenges. One is somebody might be on their last $5 on their card and they may not be able to get home from wherever they're headed if we do that. And then there's also you're setting up a situation where people who are really short on cash are then therefore being penalized in a different way than people who are also not paying, but they're a little bit more flush. So like, you know, you're basically going to really penalize the more, people who can least afford to pay the penalties right up front. And so I think there's always that component, but then also you get a situation where you have a person from MTS staff standing there. You don't want to escalate a fare check by then taking their last $25 or their last $15 or whatever, because then they might get very angry and, you know, like start an escalation that's probably not the best. So that's where we had that conversation at the last meeting. Did I forget any of the other comments?
No, I mean, I think again, it was like even after the meeting, just thinking about it, it's almost like it does trigger some equity concerns. And it's like, am I going in circles? But again, somebody that can just immediately be like, I'm going to give you $25 right now, and then you never write a ticket. So even though this doesn't go to court unless you don't participate in diversion, like in theory, there's not even a ticket in MTS's system for them. So they're able to just buy their way out of it. Whereas someone who can't afford it has the ticket waiting. You know, it seems more equitable to have everyone have, like, you got on the trolley and did not have a fare. And so you have to go through the minor inconvenience of the diversion program. You know, we're trying to make it less inconvenient by letting them pay online or by phone instead of having to mail a check or come to the transit store because, you know, but hopefully the fine and the minor inconvenience also will make somebody decide it's not worth it next time. And so I think that that's an added incentive. I wouldn't want people to just like be like, well, I have $100 on my stored value account, so just take it out and, you know, be on your way type thing. Like that, I think we'd want to flush that out. But that was one of our concerns too when we thought about it, of if we allowed that like on the spot.
So basically you're saying don't charge an additional fee on the spot. In other words, and don't charge $2.50 because they didn't pay, because that is not a diversion for them. They're just like, oh, well, how many times is that going to happen for me? So I'd rather just wait till I get caught again. So the compromise is just give them a citation and tell them that they can pay online within 30 days, let's say.
They have right now, they have 120 days. So
Oh.
if the board approved this recommendation, if the committee makes it to the board, the on-the-spot payment would go away and the diversion program would be, if you're caught without a fare, you're giving a cite, but you're automatically enrolled in the diversion program and you have 120 days to either pay that $25 or do your 3 hours of community service or reach out to MTS for some sort of accommodation of you need longer or less, argue your case for less hours or something like that.
Okay, well, I think that option B is probably the smartest way because we're inconveniencing them and it's not worth it to get caught again kind of thing versus, who cares if I get caught? I just pay the fee and go on my way and I can still ride for free until I get caught again. So-
That's part of the theory behind our proposal, yes.
That's all the questions I had. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Member Gonzalez.
And I'm one of the members that had questions about is there a way to do it on the spot where they don't get a ticket? That seemed logical to me, but I do respect the response and the feedback. And at this point, I'm supportive of staff recommendations. Happy might be too strong a word, but definitely supportive, especially with the first part of it. It seems unfortunate, but you've proven necessary to move away from the diversion program. On the second one, I'm happy to see that it's starting off with a smaller $25 fine that was discussed and explored. Before I make a motion to support staff recommendation, I just want to give my input that as far as de-escalation from the ticket writers, there might be some component of PR where the ticket really should be $50. But at this point, for now, we're doing a ramp-up program where it's only $25, especially if you pay it within X amount of time, et cetera.
Yeah.
So with that mentioned, through the chair, if I could make the motion to support staff's recommendation, I'd be happy to do so.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a motion on the floor. I had a couple of questions. I think they've been answered. I would like to, depending on what we do with the other enforcement process, if we forward this recommendation to the board, I would like to just visit everything again when we come back with the hybrid, just to see, how they relate to each other or not. But let's go to Member Rodriguez. Oh, and do I have a second? Did I get one? Okay, all right. Okay. All right, okay. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. If there's no further
I was just indicating that.
just say it so the people can hear you in the back. Your second.
Second the motion.
That was on me. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. We will see, provided this goes to the board, if there's any further discussion there, but this is the recommendation that we have. Oh, this is what I was gonna just say really quickly. In going through all of the different enforcement models up and down the state, seeing that some of the agencies have sort of discretion, and I'm not a fan of discretion because I think not being clear kind of promotes some of the other issues that we have around profiling, whether it's intentional or not, implicit bias, and those things. I do think that having it still as an option might also serve as de-escalation, especially for people who really are part of the 90,000, right? That did it once for whatever reason, will never do it again. So that's just another thing to keep in mind as we move to the board, just that there's also that nuance. Those that had the discretionary, that allowed the officers to use their discretion, also still had the low fare box recovery rates, or yes, good fare box recovery rate. So That's just something to keep in mind too.
If
Yes,
I
Sharon.
could, I think that when we first, if this does get approved by the board, I think we would want to have a sort of a phased approach to implement. So the first thing we could do is say, you must step off the train. We won't take your fare using our device or something like that. So it would be a gradual move into this over a few weeks, month or whatever. But I think staff would need to really think through that. And that's not so much a discretionary thing as more of a
Right.
educational, we're changing, we're drawing the line, but we'll do it gradually.
Member Dillard.
In response to Sharon, I would go along with that, but I would like for it to still precede the warning signs that, people are, starting to see that we're taking this more seriously. And if we're going to phase it in, I'm fine with that. But I think that the signs should be clear that we're, changing the way that we're doing things and that they need to pay attention to that and start capitulating.
Yeah, we would work with our marketing department to kind of put out a campaign, maybe of effective X date, in the buy on the spot option, no longer option, no longer an option. But we can work on what the right messaging for that is.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Please call the roll.
Montgomery Stepp,
Yes.
Dillard, Gonzalez,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Aye.
Hall.
Let me push the button. Aye.
The motion passes with 5 members voting yes, 0 members voting no, and 1 absence.
Chair, can I ask one question just to
Yes.
get the board's direction?
Sure.
I am happy to give this presentation again at the board. I just wanted to make sure that you thought that was necessary or if you would want this to be on the consent calendar since there was a similar discussion at the board. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I would say that consent is okay, and if someone needs to pull it off, that's always an option, right? Do you all think the board needs to see it again? Okay, you want to put it on the agenda? I think the focus on the graphs and the charts is important.
Okay.
For the board. So maybe a condensed version of it and go
Okay.
ahead and put it on the agenda.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we will go to item number 6, which is committee member communications and other business. Anyone have anything they'd like to share with the committee and the public? Okay, seeing none, we have our next meeting date. I don't know about this one. December 20th, 2024 at 1:30 p.m. We shall see. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.